Hello and welcome back. We are now hitting crunch time, as some of you are already in your playoffs, some of you start your playoffs this week, so this will be a must-watch for you guys. Speaking of must-watch, that's what Connor Bedard has been over the past week. 3 goals, 5 assists, 5 power play points, 15 shots, and 3 hits in his last 3 games. Crazy production, and you want that exposure right now. So in the Deep Streamers section, we'll cover a few different players who can get you exposure to Bedard. But before we do that, let's take a look at the schedule for Week 23. 54 games this week. Light nights are Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but not Sunday. Sunday has 10 games, and that will help if you're down in your matchup and you need those Sunday ads for the Hail Mary. Now, you'll probably want to start thinking about your Sunday ads maybe as early as Friday night if you're down in your matchup, and try to pick some guys who play Friday and Sunday. Now, the best schedule of the week, and probably for a larger section, as we'll get into in just a moment, is the Washington Capitals. They play the perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, so you're going to get all those light nights plus that Sunday, which is really nice to have, and we'll cover those ads in detail. The next best schedule is Seattle. They have 2 light nights on a Monday and a Friday. They also have that back-to-back Thursday, Friday, and they have some winnable games here. Montreal should be a winnable game. Arizona is winnable, even on the second night of a back-to-back, and then you also have Buffalo there to start the week, even though they were hot recently. Now, you also have Toronto. They'll be using both goalies twice this week, so if you own Samsonov or Joseph Woll, Woll is 52% owned, Samsonov in the low 70s, so both of those guys aren't necessarily ads this week, but they might get in 2 games each. Actually, they will get in 2 games each, barring injury. If for whatever reason something happens, you can go out and grab Martin Jones. He's 12% owned. We also have Carolina with a 4-game week and 1 light night on this Friday. And then you also have Buffalo here, who's got the light night Monday, and they also play Sunday as well. We're not going to cover these bottom couple teams in too much detail because it's pretty much every team plays a minimum of 3 games. So there's not a huge advantage to playing the schedule, as you're only going to get 1 more extra game. So we'll look at some trending players. But before we do anything else, let's take a look. If your playoffs are starting Week 23, these are some of the best schedules that you have to look forward to for the entirety of your playoffs. So you've got Washington with 11 games and 3 light nights at the very least. You could potentially count this Sunday. It's not a light night, but it's a nice Sunday play that you also want to have. You also have Edmonton with 11 games, 2 light nights over that stretch. You have LA coming in with 10 games but 3 light nights. Same thing with Buffalo. And then the reason why I'm mentioning Arizona, only 9 games, but 4 of the 9 are light nights, and that could actually be another bump, because the light night count kind of, the cutoff is around 5 or 6 games. So if you have a light Sunday at 7 games or something, it's not going to count during this count right here in the spreadsheet. So there are a couple of benefits to having some of these guys on the light nights, because most of your big dogs are going to be in on those heavy nights, I would assume. And you're going to ride with your big dogs for the playoffs. Now, the worst schedule is Boston and Chicago, 9 games, but all on the heavy nights. And obviously, you don't want much Chicago exposure over the course of your playoffs. You can get some now. If you're in a deep league, there's a couple of options, and we'll get into a couple of those guys as we move forward in the video. But if your playoffs are week 23 to 26, it's a lot of the same stuff, but you do get a little bit other exposure here. You still have Washington, you have Toronto up here, 16 games with 4 light nights. But some of the best would be Edmonton with 17 games, 6 light nights, Seattle with 16 and 6 light nights, Vegas with 15 and 6 light nights. However, they only have 2 games during week 25. So if you're in a tight matchup for week 25, that's very difficult. They do have 6 games and 4 light nights week 26. So if you can get through week 25, then you pick up your Vegas Golden Knights again. But especially if you own their goaltending tandem, that'll be very difficult come week 25. You also have LA here, 15 games, 5 light nights. Arizona with 7 light night games despite only 14 total. And then you also have 6 light night games from Vancouver. So the reason why I'm highlighting these specific teams is I'm assuming a lot of your top players are going to be playing on those heavy nights, and you're going to want guys to add in some game volume to help you reach your minimum, or to outgame the other person that you're matched up against. And hopefully, if you're looking for peripherals, you can find all of those things with some of these teams. But for week 23, we'll start it off with the number 1 team that you're going to want to add from, and that is Washington. There's a number of guys that we can look at, and we will look at it in detail. Covered this last week, but you're going to want to start with Tom Wilson. 3 goals in his last 6 games, 11 shots, 10 hits, 44% owned, so he's still getting it done, doing what he always does. Dylan Strome went ice cold after I shouted him out last week. 0 points in his last 4 games, but he still got 16 points over his last 14, and 8 of those on the power play. He's still power play 1. Connor McMichael took a nice jump last week. 2 goals, an assist, 3 points in his last 3 games. It's on a 3-game point streak, no less, and a power play point in there. He's 2% owned. So for your deep leagues, this would be one of your better targets. If you're looking for a consistent player who's just in and out of the lineup all the time, TJ Oshie has been just that for me. And, every time I look at him on the wire, I pick him up and hope that he's in. He was, questionable yesterday, ended up in the lineup, didn't do much, but 4 points in his last 7 games. He's only 11% owned. Then you also have Beck Malenstein, who's averaging 3 hits per game over the last 2 weeks, which is really nice to see if you're looking for peripherals, because you're going to get it. All those light nights, plus, just racking up the game volume with peripherals like hits. He also blocks quite a bit, so we'll bring up his hub in just a second. And then you also have Pacioretty, 11% owned, but only 1 assist in the last 7 games. So he's ice cold right now, but you can go there if you're looking for sort of a bounce back. Sometimes what we highlight here is the trending players heading into the week, but sometimes those trending players like Dylan Strome last week cool off, and you might want to grab a guy who's ice cold who could potentially heat up. So that could be the play there with Pacioretty. Now, as we take a look at their team as a whole on the scatter plot, you can see Ovechkin, he's still their best player by a comfortable margin. Then you've got Tom Wilson, he's going to be your best waiver ad. Then you've also got these guys grouped in over here. So you've got TJ Oshie, who I just mentioned. You've got Dylan Strome, who we also just mentioned. And then you've also got John Carlson, who's playing some pretty good hockey lately. He's very owned up, so you're not going to get him. But if you look at Oshie, 1.5 hits per game, 1.8 shots per game, 10 power play points on the season. 19 points in 42 games is okay. Not the best, but he's in and out of the lineup. He has a hard time finding that groove, staying in the lineup consistently. But when he's in there, he covers quite a bit across the board. Now you have some other guys here you can look at. You got Rasmus Sandin, who I've been owning in the Data Draft League for a little bit. 20 points in 58 games is not bad. 1.5 blocks per game isn't bad, plus a hit per game in there. But if you're looking for hits, Beck Malenstein, 2.8 hits per game on the year and over 3 hits per game over the last 2 weeks. So he's your hits guy for this week and probably the rest of the playoffs. You also have Faravari, 2.4 hits per game, 1.5 blocks. So that's what you're getting out of Faravari if you want to go that route. And then here's Connor McMichael, 2% owned is not bad for a guy who's in this same general range as some of these other guys that you could potentially add. And then there's Nick Dowd, who's not necessarily the best option. If you're in a face-off league, that will probably come in handy. He does win a bunch of draws. 16 points in 48 games is nothing crazy. 8 goals, 8 assists, nice even split, couple hits, couple blocks. Nothing crazy there. But this is kind of the breakdown for Washington, and this will hold for the week 23 to 25 or week 23 to 26 playoff schedule. So a lot of these guys, keep these guys in the back of your mind, monitor how they're doing throughout the week, and you can use these guys throughout your playoffs to try to get you some game volume. But that's going to do it for the Capitals look. Up next, let's take a look at the other team that has a pretty decent week and a pretty decent playoff schedule, and that is the Seattle Kraken. So for the Kraken, the obvious suspects here, Oliver Bjorkstrand, the all-star, 5 goals in his last 9 games, 7 points, 2 power play points in that span. He's only 29% owned. So that's what you like to see, a guy who's available, who's getting you some goal scoring. The shot volume is okay. It's not elite level, but we'll take a look at it. 2.42 shots per game is not bad. 91st percentile for power play points is what you like to see. 87th in assists, getting almost a hit per game or thereabouts. He's a 69 on the hub, so not crazy complete, but he's improved week over week, and he does get you those goals, some power play exposure, and a couple of shots per game. So that's what you like to see in Oliver Bjorkstrand. Another guy that we can mention as we move forward here, Yanni Gourde, only 6% owned. He's a little bit further down here, but he's relatively consistent across hits. He's got 1.91 hits per game, a couple blocks in there, 2 shots per game, a couple of assists, not much on the power play, not many goals either, 8 goals on the season, but he's got 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points, 16 hits in his last 6 games. So you're getting him for the hits, and this is a deep league target. This is not a guy I'd pick up in a 12-team league. But he is one of those middle 6 centermen that, every now and then gets up there with some good players and can produce offensively, but he's always going to give you those hits. So that's one of the main reasons to grab him. But if you're looking for hits, Tolvanen is your guy, at least in terms of completeness. So 2.17 hits, 1.5 blocks per game over the last 2 weeks. He's 27% owned and he's dual eligible, so he will get in your lineup more often than not. And he is really complete, so a 78 on the completeness rating. That's because of 2.56 hits per game and over a block per game on the season. He's just over 2 shots per game, which is okay, not great. He gets a little bit of power play time, 8 power play points on the season. So just a little bit of everything, kind of a Swiss Army knife. He had stretches earlier in the year where he was producing like crazy and his ownership was as high as the mid 30s into the low 40s. It's dropped a little bit because of his production. He hasn't been the most productive player over the past couple of weeks, but he is still doing what he does, which is hitting and blocking shots. And you can see his blocks are above his average over the last 2 weeks. So you're getting a lot of that and you're getting the game volume. Now, last but not least, and speaking of hits and blocks, you can also go with the defenseman Adam Larsson, 40% owned, 2.5 hits per game, 2.5 blocks per game over the last 2 weeks, which is an improvement, but it's right about where he is in terms of what he does for your team. 87th percentile in hits, 2.14 on the season, 2.03 blocks per game on the season, and the shot volume a little bit low at 1.55. But you're getting mainly hits and blocks out of him and some exposure to Vince Dunn. So Dunn and Larsson are that defensive pair. Vince Dunn is not available in most leagues. He's the power play quarterback. So you're getting 95th percentile power play there, 96th percentile in goals. 11 goals on the season is really nice for a defenseman. 96th percentile in assists and 96th percentile in points per game. And you can't necessarily go out and get him. He's very owned up. So you can get some of that exposure through Adam Larsson. Every now and then he'll throw in a goal. He does have 4 goals on the season, 14 assists on the season. So every now and then he'll give you some offensive production, but you're getting him for the peripheral floor. Now up next, we'll take a look at the scatter plot and then we'll move on. But this is just a couple of players that you can look at as we move forward. This is one of the things that I notice when I look at this scatter plot is some of the teams have a lot of, 3 or 4 guys way over here that are incredibly good, but teams like Seattle don't. And that's why it's easier to find some guys on the waiver wire like this. Some of their top scorers are only 29% owned, but they're all kind of bunched up here. So here's Tolvanen, here's McCann, who I usually love to go to. He's got 27 goals, 26 assists on the year, but he's pretty owned up. Then you have Bjorkstrand, who's pretty close to Jared McCann. Doesn't have that dual eligibility, which does hurt a little bit, but you are getting pretty similar production out of Bjorkstrand at much better ownership percentage. And then here's Vince Dunn, who we just mentioned as well. So these are the top guys for Seattle. The next wave would be Gord, Larsson, and then down here you've got Eberle, who could be another interesting piece. They just re-signed him to a contract. He's a right wing, single position eligible. He is probably available on your waiver wire. Hasn't had the craziest season offensively, 37 points in 62 games. 2.2 shots per game is nothing crazy, but it's not bad. And he does go through stretches where he is really productive, has a couple multi-point games every now and then, so he could be another option for you. But that's going to do it for Seattle. Now let's take a look at some of the overall streaming options, because as I mentioned earlier in the video, it is a week where every team plays 3 games at the very least, so maybe adding that game volume isn't going to be the best way to go for everybody. So maybe you want some trending players, and we'll take a look at that now. Starting it off, these will be your shallow league options, 10-team, 12-team leagues. Some of these guys might be available. We'll start it off with Seth Jones. This is going to get you that Bedard exposure we were talking about. 7 points in his last 5 games, 4 of those on the power play, 3 goals, 4 assists, and he's been averaging 3.83 shots per game over that stretch. He's 97th percentile in shots per game anyways at 2.62, so you're getting that shot volume from him anyway, and then it's been increased by over 1 shot per game over the past 5 games. So now would be the opportune time to pick up Seth Jones, 59% owned. He's probably not there for you in most leagues, but if he is, definitely worth a grab this week as he is their power play quarterback. You're getting that Bedard exposure and 2.1 blocks per game, which is really nice to have as well. Now, another guy that I was talking about in the Discord group is Anthony Duclair. I watched that Rangers game the other night, Rangers-Tampa. Rangers absolutely dominated that game for the first half, and then a bad turnover basically opened the floodgates, and they let in 6 in the last half of the game. A lot of that had to do with Duclair. He was the only one going for the entire game. The Point and Kucherov line was non-existent in the first period. Duclair was going the entire time, getting a bunch of shots. He's got 7 points in his last 5 games, 4 goals, 3 assists, 3 power play points. He's a goal scorer. We know that. He gets a little bit of power play time, and every now and then when he's going, John Cooper will throw him up with Kucherov and Point. So at 19% owned, that would be a perfect pickup. As they do have a 4-game week this week, this would be a nice place to pick up Anthony Duclair. But another guy that is red hot, and we've talked about him before, Wyatt Johnston. He's a center right wing, so that dual position eligibility is going to help you out. He is 59% owned, which is really high, and you're probably not going to get him. But if he is, for whatever reason, available on your waiver wire, 10 points in his last 6 games, 7 goals in 6 games, 3.83 shots per game, which is 1.2 plus above his season-long average. He's 89th percentile in goals as it is, and then he's been improving on that over the last 6 games. He's red hot, even though he's a middle 6 player for the Dallas Stars. You know, they do use him on some of that power play time, the second unit sometimes, and when he's going, he is on fire. They're pretty much 3 lines deep in Dallas, so you can kind of count on that third line. We've talked about Duchesne before, we've talked about Sagan before. Wyatt Johnston is another guy who you can add pretty much whenever, and he will, every now and then go off for a couple points per game in a stretch where you desperately need it. This could be a huge pickup if you're in a shallow league. Now, up next is a guy that I don't like that often in fantasy. I will probably not pick him up, despite the fact that I'm recommending him right now. Jake DeBrusk, 4 goals, 5 assists, 9 points in his last 7 games, 3 shots per game over that stretch, and 2 power play points. But he was non-existent until that 7-game stretch. He had almost nothing going on. That could have potentially been nerves about potentially getting traded at the deadline. He didn't get traded, and he's rewarded Boston with some really nice play over the past 7 games, which goes back about 2.5 weeks. So dual position eligibility, getting some goals, getting some assists, and that top 6, you see Zacha here, you see Coyle score a beautiful goal the other night. This top 6 is really good. You're getting pretty decent exposure. Nothing out of the ordinary on his file. Shot volume 82nd percentile, 1.25 hits per game is pretty nice. A couple shot blocks here and there, but nothing crazy for DeBrusk. As we switch it over to Zacha, this is one of those guys, along with Charlie Coyle, who's been kind of an understated player all season long, but just quietly going about his business and producing. 5 goals, 5 assists, 10 points, 4 of those on the power play in a 7-game point streak, no less. So this is one of those where that point streak might come to an end if you pick him up right now. However, they do have a 3-game week. They're on the heavy nights, so maybe not the best week to pick him up, but just something to keep an eye on. This whole top 6 is relatively productive. Zacha, Coyle, DeBrusk, you get a couple of other guys that are getting you exposure to potentially Pastrnak, which would be helpful, especially in your fantasy playoffs. But you can see here, kind of taking a dip down from a 73 to a 65, and then bumping up, and he's kind of been in this middle section here, between a 67 and a 70. So you know what you're going to get out of him, just pretty steady, consistent play, not popping off in any one particular category. Up next is a guy that I do want to recommend, and I did put in a waiver claim for him, and that is Arturi Lehkonen. For whatever reason, he got dropped in my main league, the THHL. And this is a guy that I always love to have because he's going to get you that Colorado power play exposure. 49% owned. I believe he's dual eligible. He could just be a single position left wing. It depends on your league, which league you're playing in. But 8 goals, 5 assists, 13 points, 5 of those on the power play in the last 12 games. Power play one time is the main feature here, and he's on a 4-game point streak, scored a game-winning goal the other night, so doing a little bit of everything. 93rd percentile in power play exposure, 91st percentile in goals per game, 12 goals in only 31 games for Arturi Lehkonen. Still pretty good everywhere else. 84th percentile in assists, 83rd in shots per game, 2.3 shots per game. It's been a little bit higher than that over the last couple of games. Does a little bit of everything, top 6 in Colorado, and that power play exposure is the main reason I would grab Lehkonen. If you need a little bit more hitting, if you need somebody who's going to bring a little bit better peripheral floor, you can definitely go out and grab Sam Bennett, 32% owned, single position center. He does take some faceoffs here and there, but you're mainly going to get him for what he does best, which is shots and hits. So 2.5 shots per game, 2.3 hits per game. And he does get some power play production as well. 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points, 1 on the power play in his last 3 games, but 10 shots and 10 hits in those 3 games as well, which is really crazy. You do want exposure to anybody in or around the top 6 in Florida. They're one of the best offensive teams in the league. They're one of the best teams in the league. So you definitely do want that exposure. And at only 32%, there's not a lot of better options out there in terms of players that might be available for you. Now, for whatever reason, I don't know why Brian Rust is so highly owned. I do have him in one league, and he has been really productive, surprisingly, throughout this season. He was injured for a stretch there. He's back healthy now. He's above 3 shots per game, and that probably explains his 47% ownership despite being single position right wing. 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points in his last 4 games, 17 shots in those 4 games, over 4 shot per game. I believe he had a 6-shot game and a 7-shot game in that sample size. So he is a guy who likes to shoot the puck. He's probably playing with Sidney Crosby, and I would assume, just blanked on his name, but Michael Bunting would probably be factoring in with Rust and Crosby. Crosby garden seat, and a guy who's loving to shoot the puck this year. This is basically what Ricard Raquel was last year. So 47% ownership in a shallow league, 10-team, 12-teamer. If he's available, he seems to be one of the only productive players consistently for Pittsburgh. But up next, let's take a look at some of the deeper options, and we'll go a little bit quicker through these, but we'll start it off with Philip Kurashev. Some more of that Bedard exposure is what we're looking at here. You can see this trend. He's gone, pretty high up over the past week or two, and that's on the back of a 2-goal, 3-assist, 5-point week in his last 3 games, 3 power play points. He's only 9% owned. I mentioned him on the channel a couple weeks ago, and he's been relatively productive since then. He goes off for multi-point games and then has a couple games here and there where he's not factoring in at all, so just keep that in mind. That's what you get when you're getting some of these deeper players, but he is getting you top 6 exposure to Bedard and power play 1 time with Bedard, so that would be one of the main reasons. He's also a really skilled player. They just don't have a lot around him, which is why he was not that valuable when Bedard was out, but with Bedard back, that does increase his value. At only 9%, he's probably worth a shot in a 14, 16-team league if he's available. Now, a guy who got traded at the deadline, we have Sean Walker, 12% owned. He's one of the best off the rush. So he was one of the best defensive scorers off the rush with Philly. Comes over to a team who loves to add that ingredient with Cale Makar, with Sam Girard, Bowen Byram when he was still there. And Sean Walker had a 2-goal game the other night. So 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points, 12 shots, 5 hits, and 6 blocks in his last 3 games. So you're getting that peripheral floor, 1.3 hits per game, 1.57 blocks per game, a couple of shots, almost 2 shots per game in that stretch. And then here you got 8 goals on the season, which is pretty good for a defenseman, and that should go up given the players that he's playing with. Now, I don't believe he's going to get much power play time, so that is going to hinder his value, but that's why he's available in the deep leagues. So at 12% ownership, if you're looking for a guy, I don't believe that Devon Toews has been the same dominant player that he's been 5-on-5 last year and previous years. Sean Walker could be that option, the guy who's not going to get a ton of power play time, but still getting you nice exposure on Colorado. Now, up next is a guy I was talking with one of our Discord members with, and that is Alex Nylander. So he's been one of those guys who kind of bounced around, team to team, never really stuck. Alexander Nylander for whatever reason. But he's been, one of those guys that just never seemed to find a home until he comes over to Columbus, and for whatever reason, it seems to work. So 8 goals, 11 points in his last 9 games, averaging 3.77 shots per game in that 9-game stretch. So he's a shooter and apparently a goal scorer. He had a hat trick in there. He had a 2-goal game in there. So you're getting those explosive games that could potentially win you your week, especially if you're in a points league where you get points for goals. And, he could go cold for the entire week and then just pop off for that one game and make it worth your while. That's what you would be looking for. That 3.77 is an improvement, but he's averaging over 3 shots per game on the season, and he's 95th percentile in goals just because of the fact that it's a small sample size. 8 goals in only 16 games on the season, and all of those 8 goals coming in the last 9 games. So he's getting an opportunity with Columbus. They're putting him in the top 6, and he seems to be running with it. He's dual position eligible as well, which is a pretty rare sight on this list. So this could be one of your better options if you're looking for some of that shot volume that I mentioned and the goal scoring specifically. Speaking of shot volume and goal scoring, Fabian Zetterlund, this was who I was talking about in terms of, we were going back and forth in the Discord group, which of these two would you pick up? And both of them do a lot of the same types of things, but Nylander has the better shot volume. So Zetterlund, 3 shots per game over the last 6 games is really nice. That's an improvement on his 2.39 season-long average. He does hit 1.5 hits per game, which is nice to see. And he's got 7 points in his last 6 games, 4 of those on the power play. This comes into the category of, you know, somebody's got to score for the Sharks. They're not going to, I mean, they're going to lose a lot of games, but they're going to have to put somebody out there on the power play. Somebody's going to have to put the puck in the net once or twice every game. And Zetterlund, at only 6% ownership, might be one of your better options. You could potentially also look at Granlund. I think his ownership is a little bit higher. He's dual position eligible as well, so he gets you some, you know, better, environment, I guess, some better stuff around him, more assists and whatnot. But Zetterlund is a guy who's going to get you the shot volume and the goal scoring, and he is a lot lower ownership, so that would be the reason we're featuring him here. But if you're looking for all of that I just mentioned in Zetterlund, I would bank on a guy like Dylan Guenther, just because he's got that upside. He's a young player who's got that upside. He's proven it at the AHL level. Now he's doing it at the NHL level. So 2 goals, 1 assist, a power play point in his last 4 games, 3 shots, and 1.38 hits per game, which is a little bit uncharacteristic. He's averaging 0.81 hits per game on the season, but this is what you like to see. He's getting usage on that power play. He's a goal scorer. He's got a really nice release at only 7% owned. A single position left winger is not the best, but you're getting 90th percentile power play exposure. So he's got 9 power play points in only 31 games, which is really nice to see. And then the goal scoring, 84th percentile there, 10 goals in 31 games is really good for a young player. This would be an upside play. Obviously, Arizona's not the best team, but they're going to give him an opportunity down the stretch to show them what he can do. And this would be an opportunity to try to ride that as you're in your playoff week. One of the better options this week, however, is probably going to be Cam York. Now, he is the power play quarterback for Philadelphia. It's worth noting that their power play has been terrible the entire season, so maybe not the best power play to be the quarterback of. However, at 11% ownership, he's probably one of the only power play quarterbacks that you can grab. 4 assists, a power play point in his last 3 games, to go along with 7 shots and 8 blocks. So really good production there from Cam York. He's 89th percentile in goals, which is really nice to see. 9 goals on the year. I believe the league leader has 12, so he's really close to that mark. The shot volume is a little bit low for my taste, especially for a guy who's getting that power play exposure. The power play numbers are low because earlier in the year they had Sanheim there. They had other guys there that were kind of random. Then they bring in Drysdale. He gets that. Then he gets injured, so now they give it to Cam York. So this could be an opportunity to kind of ride the back of this, power play exposure that Cam York is going to get. And at 11% ownership, he's one of the only guys that you're going to get that from. Last but not least, we'll talk about Garnet Hathaway just because of this crazy stat. 5.83 hits per game over his last 6 games. He's 100th percentile in hits, so 3.88 hits per game is 3rd in the NHL behind Jeremy Lauzon and Michael Pezzetta. Lauzon is actually 4.8 hits per game, which is an entire hit per game more than Garnet Hathaway. However, over the last 6 games, Hathaway's been outpacing him at 5.83 hits per game. In that stretch, he had an 11-hit game, multiple 8-hit games, and then a couple 6-hit games. So he's doing this regularly, and if you're looking for peripherals, it doesn't really matter if they're only getting a 3-game week. If he's hitting that much, you definitely want him in your lineup. At only 15% ownership, he's probably available for you. And even if you're in a 12-team league and you just need hits, this would be the guy to go and pick up. But up next, let's take a quick look at the goaltending. I know you're going to need those goaltending streams, so let's do that next. We'll start it off with Calvin Pickard, 11% owned. He's been on fire, so 2 wins in his last 3 starts, 1.35 goals against, 955 save percentage, and you can see that reflected in his hub. You can see 92nd percentile in goals against, and 88th in save percentage. 919 on the season is really good for a backup. This is a really nice story as they obviously had problems with Jack Campbell. He got sent down. They bring up Pickard, and they don't have to do anything at the deadline to solidify their goaltending. He's been really good. He's 3.5 above expected. They're playing actually pretty good team defense, 82nd percentile there, and you can see him jump from a 29 all the way up to a 64 where we are now. So this was way back in late November around when he was getting called up, and now he's all the way up here. He has climbed an immense amount up the boards, so he's been a much, much better goaltender, getting some more starts. The start volume is low. The wins are pretty decent given the start volume. and they do have the back-to-back, so I hope that he doesn't get this Saturday game at Toronto. You would hope to find him Sunday against Ottawa. That might be a pickup that could potentially win you your week if you're battling back in your matchup and you pick him up for that Sunday game against Ottawa. Could be a track meet. Both teams have good offenses. However, the Edmonton Oilers are pretty good defensively, so that would be a reason to pick him up. If you're looking for good defense exposure and good team exposure, you can also go with Anthony Stolarz. Another situation where he was down at a 38.9. He's all the way up to a 73.5. You can see him all the way up here right beneath Georgiev and Saros, right above Jari and Kochetkov and Ullmark and Hill, all these name brand goaltenders, and he's a backup who's in the same conversation as them. 5 wins in his last 5 games, 1.73 goals against, 933 save percentage. You would hope to find him in that back-to-back game against Philly as opposed to the Rangers just because of the strength of opponent. Philly's not a slouch either. They're also a playoff team, so this could be a difficult matchup. However, this is a very good team. They've beaten the Rangers twice this year, and they do seem to have a problem with Philadelphia. For whatever reason, Philadelphia seems to be able to beat Florida. So do keep that in the back of your mind. If you see them play Stolarz against the Rangers, it might not be the worst case scenario. For whatever reason, Philly's beat them twice. However, this should be a really nice exposure play as you're getting 94th percentile team defense, 14.2 above expected, 925 save percentage on the year, 2.0 goals against. Everything you like to see in a backup goaltender. Whenever he starts, he's definitely worth a stream. So there's another guy at the bottom of this list that you'll see the same type of thing that we'll talk about. But for now, Anthony Stolarz, 22% would be a really nice pickup. Now, different kind of pickup is Dave Riddick. He was the starter for a brief stretch there in LA. He lost the job to Cam Talbot, who you can now see is number 4. We'll just take a quick look at Talbot. As you can see him drop off a cliff and then kind of climb his way back out of that cliff. So now he's up to almost an 85. And then what you also have at the opposite end of that is Dave Riddick, who has dropped off quite a bit. If I can spell his name properly while I'm talking, which is not the easiest thing to do. It's probably David. Yep. So Dave Riddick, not the best stats on the season. Doesn't have a whole lot going on lately because of the fact that he lost that starting job, so he hasn't played much. He has 1 win in his last 2 starts, which is nothing crazy. One of those starts was not great, gave up 4 goals, but you're getting 2.3 goals against and the good team defense exposure, 85th percentile there. He is 10.2 goals saved above expected for what it's worth, so that is worth pointing out. And then a 916 save percentage on the year. When he was the starter, this was the main feature. These 2 numbers were, really good, especially getting the start volume that he was getting. He's not getting that anymore, but they do have this back-to-back, and you would hope to see him in this game against Chicago. That would be the main reason to pick him up. I don't necessarily like it against Minnesota, who's been playing much better of late. Kaprizov with 11 points in his last 6 games, so that's not a good sign if you're featuring Dave Riddick in this game. But if he gets this Chicago game, that would be a nice spot start for a guy who is available on the wire at 17% ownership. Now, this time of year, there's not a lot in terms of potential starters. This could be one of those. Jake Allen, 18% owned. I don't want to put the cart before the horse. It's been 1 game. He did play really well. Gave up a goal 15 seconds in and battled back in that game to put up, I believe it was 35 saves. Ends up with a 946 and the win against Dallas. They have a back-to-back Saturday versus Ottawa, Sunday on Long Island. So, take your pick which game you think would be a better start for Allen. They also have Kaapo Kähkönen, whose ownership is pretty similar. Kähkönen's numbers were not quite as good, but both guys are going to get an opportunity here to try to get the Devils some traction, as they are technically still in a playoff push, not a spot, but they're still alive in the playoff push, and they need somebody to take the ball and run with it. If it's Jake Allen, he would be a pretty good pickup at only 18% ownership, even if you're just getting him for that back-to-back. Now you can see the Islanders there. Another guy who I usually talk about in this section of the video is Semyon Varlamov. His numbers haven't quite been as good as they were earlier in the year when he was up here at a 56. He's now down at a 47, and he's been higher than that in years past. However, 1 win in his last 2 starts, 2.4 goals against, 906 save percentage, And they do have 2 difficult games here against Winnipeg and against Jersey, the back-to-back Saturday, Sunday, so he will get one of those 2 games, and the Islanders desperately need wins. They have to get into the playoffs. They're, knocking on the door. They were right there, and then I believe they lost their last 2, so this could be an opportunity. Actually, they're playing right now, and I'm missing it for this video, so that's dedication. I'm missing my Rangers to record this for you guys, so hopefully the Rangers pull it out, but if you're picking up Varlamov, he's usually one of those guys that's going to get you some good defense. However, that's not the case this year. 27th percentile in terms of team defense. He is above expected, 2.2. 9-10 save percentage is pretty good, and the 2.9 goals against is not bad. However, if you're looking for the best of all possible worlds, Laurent Brossoit is your guy. 31% owned, meaning he's there in even probably most 12-team leagues. 3 wins in his last 3 starts, 0.67 goals against, 965 save percentage. I believe he's got at least 1 shutout, if not 2 shutouts in that span. He's got a back-to-back Saturday on Long Island and then Sunday in Washington with a little bit of travel, but it's not crazy travel. They are one of the best defensive teams in the league, 73rd percentile there. He's 87th percentile, goals saved above expected, 11.3 above expected, 927 save percentage, 2.0 goals against, 2 shutouts. So this is the perfect backup that you could potentially find on the waiver wire. I scooped him up in my main league just to have him. I did have the Vegas tandem. Their week 25 kind of scared me off, and I ended up picking up Brossoit. I'll probably just hold on to him for now because whenever he gets in, he puts up a really quality start. But that's going to do it for this week's video. Hopefully this was enough information for you. I didn't want to bombard you with stuff, but I know this is the time of the year where you need every edge that you could possibly find. So hopefully you found something that'll give you that edge for this playoff week if you're in the playoffs. If you're not, stay tuned for next week as we'll get into the nitty-gritty, the week 24 to 26 playoff matchups, which is, I believe, the Yahoo standard format, and we'll break down week 24 in great detail. But that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.